My husband told me that when he was a young man, he was traveling with two of his band members. At the time, the road he was on was small. They were coming from Stone Lake, Wisconsin, toward Rice Lake. They were going to a gig. He showed me the area and says nowadays this road is way wider than it was back then. He said at the time, the road was small enough to where only two cars could pass by each other at a time. It was on that road that he saw something crawl out of the swamp. It had black fur. The fur was short. It had a long snout and a big head with lots of long teeth. The teeth looked like they were used to catch fish. The animal's eyes were big and shined red in the headlights of the car. The ears were on top of the head, but they were small. He said this thing looked evil. It looked at him, and it looked mean. It didn't show any fear. He said if you had seen this thing, you would not have any desire to get out of the car, and he was happy to be inside the car and not hitchhiking on that road. It had a long, strong tail, and when the animal started to slide into the other swamp on the other side of the road, its hind legs and tail were still on the road. He said the animal's shoulders were about 30 inches off the ground. He stopped and let it pass from one side to the other, and asked his friends if they'd seen the same thing. One of them wanted to stop and look at it, but my husband asked if he was crazy, said no, and kept on driving. I've known him for more than 21 years, and he never lets us get even close to that swamp. He always told me it was dangerous. When I asked him what he thinks it was, he told me it might have been a creature that old Indians call a water panther. Years and years back, we were out in the woods, picking balsam pine. He placed me close to the dirt-top road. We drove on that road for a good hour before we found a spot to pick. We got out of the car and said I was supposed to stay close to the road, and made me pick there. He went deeper into the woods, trying to find another spot to pick. When he was gone, something snorted and threw pebbles at my back. I thought it was my husband at first, playing a prank on me. I told him to stop, because he wasn't going to scare me. But the grunting sound came again, and more pebbles were thrown at me. I turned around, but I still didn't see anybody. And again I said, "Come on, David. I know it's you. Stop it." That's when I heard his voice from back in the woods, calling me because he'd found something weird. When I heard him calling me, the balsam pine branches in my arms flew into the air, and I ran as fast as I could to him, and even jumped over some fallen trees to get to him. When I got to him, he showed me a big oak log. It looked like a drum rim. It was under a big tree, and in the tree there was a big branch that was shaped like a drumstick. It was hanging right over the thing that looked like a drum. At the time, he was actually looking for something that he could make a homemade drum out of, and we decided to take it with us. It took both of us to roll that thing out of the forest, but when we got to the truck, the two of us couldn't lift that thing into the bed. So after that, I showed him where the pebbles were thrown at me. And we found something else. We found what almost looked like something had made an apartment or a home out of the balsam pines. It had openings from one room to the next, and in the third one, there was something that looked like a big soft bed. It was made out of a lot of pine needles and moss on the ground, and it was very, very big. When we were back home, we told his uncle about it, and he asked if the thing had followed us. We said no, because we were about 35 miles from our home. But a few weeks later, when it started to snow, I was outside walking my puppy to try to get him house trained. I was really close to my house, but I found big footprints in the snow. The footprints were huge. I saw toes, and the steps that were far away from each other made me think it was either a very tall man or this thing really had followed us home. It was a clear track of something walking on two legs. I'd guess it was a size 15 or better, and they were really, really wide. I went inside and told my husband and his friends. They went outside, and in a short amount of time, all of them were looking for a Bigfoot. This happened to me when I was 13 years old. My grandpa used to own a hog ranch in northern Arkansas around Harrison. It's very rural out there. I went there with him one day, and we did things like fix fences and feed hogs and whatnot. We worked until the sun set. As we were on our way out, I remember that there was this big cave right there on the property. It was near the entrance, and I wanted to go look around it before we went back. The cave was about 200 yards from the truck at this point. We parked the truck, and the head of this trail went directly from where we were into the cave entrance. We got out with our flashlights and started making our way down the trail. When we got about halfway there, we started hearing noises to our left in the woods. I asked my grandpa what it was, and he said it was probably just a deer. So, we kept walking. The noise started getting closer and closer to us, though. It was like something was walking, and the pattern of the footsteps, it sounded like it was on two legs. We stopped and pointed our lights into the woods. We could hear it within 10 feet of us, but the brush was so thick around us, we couldn't see it. All of a sudden, there was this bright flash about 10 feet off the ground, and I heard this crazy sound. It was so surreal and blood-curdling. I've always described it as a baby screaming mixed with some sort of alien spaceship. I heard the bark of the tree scrape all the way down, as if something with nails was sliding down it, trying to get our attention. Then I heard the leaves crunch as the thing took off in the direction of the cave. My grandpa and I stood there in shock. I looked at him. He'd drawn his pistol. He didn't have to say a word. We started making our way back the way we'd come. We walked at first, but then we started running. When we got to the end of the trail, we were surprised to find that the truck was a quarter mile down the road. When we finally got to the truck, we got out of there fast. Another strange thing. 2 hours had passed, according to the truck's clock. But it felt like we'd only been there for 15 minutes, maybe even less. Needless to say, we don't go back into that cave anymore. Please call me V. This isn't my encounter, but my mom's. It was the summer of 1996, 2 years after our UFO encounter that I told you about. This year, my mom was doing a summer camp with about 5 kids from her after-school classes, so I had a lot of kids my age to play with. Nothing exciting happened that summer. Only one of the campers falling into some cactus, and us laughing the whole time my mom was pulling the needles out. A couple of nights after we had a long day of swimming in the ocean, we were all tired, so we went to bed early that night. I really wish I hadn't. Otherwise, maybe I could have seen the thing that my mom did too. The next morning, I overheard her telling my uncle what she had seen the night before. You see, she's a very restless sleeper, and spends a lot of nights up reading her Bible. That night was one of the same nights. I don't know exactly what time she was up, but she said as she was sitting there reading her Bible, something told her to look up. When she did, that's when she saw the creature. It was about 20 to 25 feet from her, and sitting on the rocks overlooking the water. The moon was full that night, so she got a very good look at it. She said it was dark gray, almost black in color, and she could see the up and down motion of its breathing. It had big wings coming out of its back. She said that the wings were huge, and its eyes were black. This thing was staring right at her. She said it reminded her of that 90s cartoon show, Gargoyles. She continued to watch this thing for the rest of the night, and at about 5:30 in the morning, when the sun was coming up, it flapped its wings and flew off. She didn't see where it went, but she did tell me this thing didn't make her feel frightened. She was just in awe of what she had seen. Later, when everybody else got up, she told my uncle and my dad what she had witnessed the night before. They went over there to see if they could find any tracks, but I'm not sure if they did or not. My mom said this thing was about 6 feet tall. Because of that size and the fact that it had wings, the only thing that could come to her mind was a gargoyle. When I got older, I loved watching and reading about the unexpected, and I saw a show talking about Mothman. Maybe that's what she saw. Or maybe it could have been a gargoyle. I don't think we'll ever find out. I live in a borough in southern New Jersey. And I know it sounds cliche, but I think I saw the Jersey Devil. Or at least, maybe the Jersey Devil's cousin. I was driving down the road one day in 2013. On the passenger side of this road, there's this big overhanging tree. I'd say the lowest branch is maybe 15 or 20 feet up above the ground. As I was driving towards it, I saw something big moving in the branches, concealed by the leaves. The tree itself was shaking, like it was stressed under the weight of whatever it was that was moving around. I tried to watch it as best as I could, while still paying attention to the road. Then, all of a sudden, this big humanoid-looking thing burst out of it and flew up and behind my car. It was like this light greenish tan color. I didn't see any tail, although Danae, who I'll introduce you to in a moment, swears she saw a tail. I didn't really see the face, but I got a good look at the wings of this thing. There was no feathers on it. I could actually see through these wings. I could see the sun coming through the skin that was pulled between what looked like elongated fingers, almost like a bat's wing, but a million times the size. This thing looked like it was my size. It was human size. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't anything that I've ever seen. This thing was definitely paranormal. I still to this day can't explain it. Anyway, I slammed on my brakes after this thing burst out of the trees. I almost crashed. The car behind me skidded to a stop and almost hit me. I remember when this thing burst out of the tree, leaves and branches broke off and flew everywhere. It's like this thing just exploded out of the tree. It didn't need any updraft. All it needed was the power of those enormous wings. Both of us got out of the car and watched this thing fly away. It beat its wings like it'd done it a million times. As it flew by me, before I got out of the car, I didn't see any hands. It looked like the wings were where the hands should be, like a bird or a bat. It's not a creature that had arms and hands and wings on its back. It looked like the wings replaced the hands. It flew off into the sunset, and we never saw it again. The other witness, her name's Danae. She's actually become a very good friend of mine. She saw pretty much the same thing I did, except for the tail. She said it had this long tail, and it was just flapping back and forth as the wings beat past her. What the hell could this thing be? It doesn't really sound like the Jersey Devil to me. This thing looked more like a gargoyle or something. Could there be another winged thing here in New Jersey? What the hell is going on here? My name is Yuki, or at least that's what my nickname was when these events took place. I'm a male and I'm in my early 30s. I come from Oahu in Hawaii. The first time I had an incident, I was with a couple of friends, Noah and Ellen. We were on a picnic and a nature walk at the Hoa Maluia Botanical Gardens. That's in my hometown. It was a nice day, and my friends and I had set out around 9 or 10 so we could get to the picnic grounds near the lake. After walking to the visitor center and following a small partially paved trail, we got to the lake at around 11:30. We sat down for a quiet lunch and watched other visitors feed the ducks and fish that had taken up residence at the gardens. Then we set out on one of the side trails near a small stream that fed into the lake, and after about half an hour or so of walking, we came to a small clearing. That's when it happened. Noah and Ellen were taking pictures of the scenery, and I was watching a couple of birds playing in the trees that were lining the stream. And that's when I saw it. It was large, and it looked like it was made from a living shadow. It was human-shaped. It was just watching us. I really don't know if it meant us harm or not, but it didn't feel right being near it. And when it noticed me staring back at it, it took a couple of steps back into the trees and just vanished. Around this time, Noah asked me what I was looking at, and all I told him was, "I'll tell you when we get back to the visitor center. I don't want Ellen to get scared." Then, we left that clearing pretty damn fast. Once we were back at the gardens, I told them what I saw. We haven't spoken about it since, and Noah and I have lost contact since then. I only recently got in touch with Ellen. We were talking about things we did back in the day, and this incident came up. We started to discuss it, and she told me it may have been a shadow person. I'm inclined to believe her, though at the time, I thought it was a cryptid sighting, like a Bigfoot or something. I know that sounds crazy, but even here in Hawaii, people have had encounters with large, hairy wild men and women. My second encounter happened when another friend and I, we'll call her Charlotte, went out for a drive around the island with some of her friends from college. We decided to do a bit of stargazing in an area called the Blowhole, which is off limits now, when suddenly we heard one of her friends shout out, "What the hell is that down there?" We went over to the wall to look at what it was. Oh God, I regret ever looking over that wall into the water, because what I saw, I never ever want to see again. In Japanese, we call it a hinotama or a hitodama, but I think many of your listeners will know it as will-o'-the-wisp. It was just floating there, glowing a palish green-white. And after I watched it for a few more seconds, Sally again shouted out, "What the hell is that thing?" That's when it turned and looked up at us. Just typing this now, of what it looked like and what it did, is giving me goosebumps. It looked like a skull, kind of like the bowling ball in the movie Mystery Men. And it was floating up towards us, just staring at us. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. To this day, I shudder to think what could have happened if we hadn't hauled ass away from there. My name is James Montana. I am currently 23 years old and I reside in Pleasant Hill, California. The story I am about to tell takes place approximately 8 years ago, back in the summer of 2009, when I was only 15 years old. As a 15-year-old, I was pretty quiet, and even selectively mute. I kept to myself because it was always difficult for me to deeply connect with other people and to be accepted by them, due to the fact that my ideology was labeled as eccentric. It was always differed from the rest, as if I was trying to argue, but I was simply expressing myself. As for my hobbies, they just simply weren't appreciated by everyone, so I didn't really have any friends. I was ostracized and exiled as an outcast from my age group, a misfit inside and out of my home and society. So with that, I guess you can assume I was bullied, teased, harassed, abused, neglected, and for the most part avoided by others, because I seemed oddly misplaced and strange. So, I stuck to isolating and alienating myself from people as a means to escape the annoyance of the dwellers that inhabited the concrete jungle I called high school, just to find myself a peace of mind, individualism, independence, and freedom. For some reason, solitude always brought me the comfort that I longed for. It made me feel free. At this time, I was living with my mother, Bonnie Connor, and my brother, Jared Montana. We were in my hometown of Boones Mill, Virginia. I was attending Franklin High School and had recently gotten my first job as a youth worker after my mentor referred me to my county's local Goodwill Industries. It was a government-funded program for disadvantaged youth. I worked there for about a year before the funding of the program expired. Our responsibilities and duties while we were there consisted of things ranging from warehouse work, such as taking in and organizing donated clothing, merchandise, and other miscellaneous memorabilia, inventory, stocking, zoning, cleaning, and on other days, we would carpool out to the neighborhood and participate in community construction projects. This also included elderly outreach programs. One winter evening as the sun was setting, we were finishing up clearing an elderly woman's driveway free of the snow. That day, the group of workers consisted of myself, my brother, and a number of other people from our high school. There was about 5 or 6 of us, excluding the Goodwill staff members. I was positioned in the back, near the woods by myself, with my brother in front and our other group members on the far side of the house, further ahead of where I was. After about 15 or 20 minutes had passed of shoveling snow, when I heard a twig crack in half very loudly behind me. Something was moving around behind me in the brush, making the bushes rustle as if something was caught up and trying to get free. I assumed it was a dog or something, maybe owned by the woman whose house I was working on, or even a nearby neighbor. When I looked behind me to see what it was, I dropped my shovel in shock. My blood ran cold, and a feeling of dread rose from my chest to my throat. I felt like I was choking on my own heartbeat. What I saw was the golden glinted glare of a tall and lanky creature that had the body of a grizzly bear and the head of a German shepherd. It was covered in matted jet black fur, with dagger-like teeth, and a large set of fangs that it bared with its snout tensed, and its eyes squinted at me, giving me an angry and aggressive look of anger and hatred, as if it wanted to rip me to shreds right then and there. But it did nothing. It just stared at me, not moving a muscle. Then the figure stood on its hind legs from its crouching position, and I swear to you, it measured up to about 8 or 9 feet tall, and the legs were bent backwards like a canine. Its fur was matted and stiff, looking like it was brittle and dried out, like a stray dog. And it stank, like musky urine, stale blood, and wet dog. And the claws looked like long, skinny talons. The figure opened its mouth, as if it were going to speak. And then it did. It spoke with this cold, rattling voice, like a cackling, scratchy heckle in the back of its throat, deep and low, gravelly, like its throat was dried out and burnt. The wrath of the eagle will be felt throughout the lands, and the phoenix will feast upon the ashes of the dawn, bringing a new winter that will carve a path of new light to filter through the catacombs of oblivion. And with that, the figure fled back to where it came from. Out of sight, but definitely not out of mind. For the rest of the day, that phrase replayed itself, echoing in the void of my mind, with that same deep, throaty, demonic, cold breath that sounded long expired and dried up. I never told anybody about what happened that day, about what I experienced. I didn't feel the need to. Nobody would have believed me anyways. To this day, though, I still have a hard time believing in what happened myself. But unfortunately, the story that I just shared is indeed true, and I will surely take this to my grave, as I won't be forgetting it anytime soon.